The silence was the wrong shape. Threx Call stood at observation Tier 4, his chitin pressed against the reinforced glass, and watched the amber failsafe light rotate across a chamber that had been screaming moments ago. The Sorrow Well. A cylinder of polished obsidian and acoustic baffles that dropped 400 meters into the Academy's foundation, rated for Class 11 psychological filtration. It had broken every species in the galactic catalog. 12,600 memory rings were written into his chitin like burial layers, each test recorded in biological tissue. 2.3-second acoustic cycles burned into the shell that covered his back and shoulders. He could feel the weight of them, the pressure of 12,600 lives compressed into calcium and keratin. Below him on the chamber floor, a human stood at the exit door. 5'3", soft tissue biology, hair pulled back exposing the curve of her neck. She held something in her left hand, a folded shape the size of his thumb claw. Her right hand was raised. She knocked 3 times, the rhythm of someone asking to be let in from a back porch. The readout on his console blinked. Environment hostile to test parameters. What you're about to hear, I wish I could say the chamber one, stay close. 6 hours earlier, Threx had reviewed the cadet roster over breakfast. 47 names, 40 projected unconscious within 90 minutes. Standard filtration cycle. The numbers never changed much. The Sorrow Well operated on evolutionary pressure. It found what a species feared most and made that fear tangible. Ancestral predators, darkness, isolation, the specific shape of death that had killed enough of a species' ancestors to write itself into their genetic code. The chamber amplified that fear until the cadet either adapted or broke. Most broke. Threx checked his chitin in the washroom mirror before the cycle. The memory rings circled his torso in tight bands. 32 years of observation duty, 12,600 tests. He could trace individual layers if he focused. The Qualari cluster that had compressed so tightly 3 members suffocated. The Belvroni whose torso had crystallized under pressure. The Misvari pack that had stopped breathing simultaneously and never started again. Each test left a mark, a 2.3-second recording cycle embedded in living tissue. The Academy called it institutional memory. Threx called it what it was, a graveyard he carried on his back. He logged the date, another layer about to form. The cadet files scrolled past on his screen. Species variety was standard for mid-cycle qualification. Qualari, Skrillex, Salvin, 2 Cryaxians with thin cadet tier shells, and at the bottom of the list, flagged in amber, Rena, Homo sapiens. Threx pulled her file. Soft tissue biology, no armor plating, no venom sacs, no protective symbiotes. Heat signature 36.8 degrees Celsius. The file noted this was standard for the species but inefficient compared to cold-blooded metabolisms. She would lose heat fast in the well's climate-controlled environment. Expected survival time, 40 to 60 minutes before thermal shock. Threx's assistant, a younger Cryaxian named Vess with only 4,000 memory rings, appeared at his shoulder. The human cadet. Yes. Rated for Class 11. Rated, Threx said and closed the file. Vess's chitin made a soft clicking sound. Uncertainty. Rated isn't proven. Threx did not respond. The statement was accurate but irrelevant. Homo sapiens had been classified Tier 4 sentient based on technological aptitude and cultural complexity. Tier 4 qualified for Class 11 exposure. Whether the species could survive, it was a different question, one the Sorrow Well would answer in 90 minutes. The cadets entered the chamber in 2 groups. Species with similar thermal requirements clustered together. The Qualari came first, a 7-member cluster organism that moved like a single being. Their individual components were small, each about the size of Threx's hand, but together they formed something larger, more aware. Under stress, they compressed. Threx had seen clusters reduced to half their original volume, members on the outside crushing those in the center. The Skrillex followed, bipedal, exoskeletal. Their leg joints clicked with each step, a constant percussion that the chamber's acoustic sensors would measure for stress acceleration. Normal clicking, 0.3-second intervals. Under fear, that dropped to 0.11 seconds. At 0.08, the joints shattered. 2 Salvin cadets entered next. Photosynthetic membranes covered their upper bodies in translucent sheets. Green now healthy, the membranes would darken under stress. Brown first, then black. Necrotic tissue looked the same across most carbon-based life. The human entered last. Rena was smaller than her file indicated. 5'3" translated differently when standing next to species that averaged 7 to 9 feet. She wore the standard cadet uniform gray synthetic fiber that regulated temperature poorly. Her hair was pulled back into a single braid that exposed the curve of her neck. Threx noted this as a tactical error. The neck was one of the most vulnerable areas of human anatomy. Concealing it would have been instinctive for a species with predator-based evolutionary trauma. She walked to the center of the chamber and stopped, reached into her left pocket, removed something. Threx zoomed the observation feed. A folded shape, paper, cream-colored. 11 creases visible, organic material, processed plant fiber. He logged it in the console, personal emotional anchor, negligible tactical value. Rena held the paper shape in both hands. A crane. The file had mentioned human origami as a cultural practice, folding paper into animal shapes for meditation or ceremony. Threx filed this under Category 7, Superstitious Coping Mechanisms. "Is the humidity always this high?" Rena said. Her voice carried clearly through the chamber's audio pickup. "Feels like a laundry room." 15 seconds into a Class 11 psychological filtration event, and the human was complaining about humidity. Threx made a note. Either ignorance or exceptional emotional suppression. Both were testable. The white light dropped. No flicker, no warning hum, no 2.3-second ramp-up cycle. The sorrow well began at 60 decibels, a baseline hum that resonated through the obsidian walls and into the cadets' bodies. For most species, this was unpleasant but manageable. The chamber was simply establishing acoustic mapping, learning the shape of each cadet's fear response. Threx watched the biometric feeds populate on his screen. Heart rates, respiration, neural activity patterns. The Qualary cluster's pain receptors spiked immediately, 220% above baseline. They compressed by 8%, members pulling tighter together. The Skrillex' leg joints accelerated, 0.24-second intervals, 0.19, 0.11. Seismic readings from the joints showed microfractures forming. The exoskeleton was beginning to fail. Rena's biometric feed displayed. Anomalous baseline, no fear signature detected. Not low, not suppressed, absent. Threx flagged the reading for post-cycle review. Possible sensor malfunction, or the human's biology was different enough that standard fear markers didn't apply. Some species registered fear through chemical changes in blood composition, others through electrical activity in specific neural clusters. The chamber would find it. The sorrow well always found it. 70 decibels. The hum shifted frequency, became directional. The acoustic baffles focused sound onto specific cadets based on their fear profiles. The Qualary heard the approach of their ancestral predator, a sound their species hadn't encountered in 12,000 years but still carried in genetic memory. A wet clicking, mandibles the size of buildings. The cluster compressed to 60% original volume. Members in the center began to suffocate. The Skrillex heard stone, the grinding of continental plates. Their species had evolved in deep caves where seismic activity meant death. The clicking of their joints hit 0.09-second intervals, critical stress. Rena stood in the center of the chamber, head tilted slightly. "Is there a water fountain?" Threx's chitin made a sound he didn't recognize, a crack, very quiet. He reached back and felt the ridge of his lowest memory ring, a hairline fracture, stress response. He was observing, not participating, but his body was reacting anyway. Vess leaned closer to the screen. "Sir, the human's heart rate, 68 beats per minute, elevated from her resting baseline of 62, but barely. A human under Class 1 fear induction should be at 90 to 120. The file said so." "Sensor error," Threx said, but the thermal imaging was consistent. Body temperature steady, respiration normal, pupil dilation within resting parameters. The sensors were working fine. The chamber was working fine. The human wasn't responding. 80 decibels, Class 3 psychological pressure. The chamber's AI cycled through the human ancestral trauma library. Predators first. The sound of something large moving through tall grass. Breathing. The crack of bone between teeth. Rena's heart rate dropped to 64. Darkness, the specific quality of night before fire was discovered. Absolute. The kind of dark where predators hunted and humans died. Rena blinked twice. 62 beats per minute. The chamber tried drowning, the sound of water rising, lungs filling, the panic of suffocation. Rena unfolded her paper crane, smoothed one crease against her thigh, and refolded it. 8 seconds total. 62 beats per minute. Threx checked the chamber's acoustic log. 17 separate fear triggers deployed in the last 4 minutes. Each one calibrated to human evolutionary history. Each one receiving the same response. "Nunt. She's adapting," Vess said quietly. No, Threx watched the biometric feed. Adaptation showed as a curve. Initial spike, then gradual decline as the nervous system adjusted. Rena's readings were flat. Adaptation requires response. She's not responding. Then what is she doing? Threx didn't answer. He didn't have one. Two Salvan cadets collapsed. Their photosynthetic membranes had gone black, necrotic, dead tissue still attached to living bodies. The medical team would remove them after the cycle. Standard procedure. Threx logged their collapse times, 42 minutes, 43 minutes, within expected parameters for their species. The Misvari pack near the east wall stopped breathing. 12-second hold. Threx counted. At 11 seconds, one member bit through its own foreleg. Pain to override fear. The pack gasped simultaneously. Threx had seen this 14 times before. It always worked. Pain was more immediate than fear. The body prioritized the present threat. Rena sat cross-legged on the obsidian floor, placed the paper crane in front of her. The acoustic sensors registered the soft tap of paper on stone, 0.003 decibels, barely audible. The chamber's AI logged it as background noise. Threx zoomed the feed on her face. She was looking at the crane, not with concentration, not with fear or hope or any emotion the biometric sensors could identify, just looking, the way someone might glance at a clock. 84 decibels, Class 5 filtration. The chamber changed tactics. It stopped targeting individual fears and shifted to species-wide trauma. For the Qualari, this meant the Great Compression, an event 3,000 years ago when their homeworld's atmospheric pressure had spiked during a solar flare. 60% of the population had been crushed under their own body weight. The cluster began cannibalizing non-essential members. A survival response Threx had documented 47 times. When the whole was threatened, the expendable parts were consumed to preserve the core. He watched 3 small bodies dissolve into the larger mass. Organic matter redistributed. The cluster's pain receptors were off the scale now, 800% above baseline, but they were still conscious, still trying to survive. The Belvroni examiner stationed on the lower observation deck developed hairline fractures across her torso, 14 cracks visible through her translucent carapace. Her species crystallized under stress, biological tissue converting to rigid mineral structures, protective in small doses, fatal when the conversion reached vital organs. She had maybe 10 minutes before her lungs solidified. Rena adjusted her left bootlace. 4 seconds. She did not look up, did not acknowledge the screaming around her. The Qualari made sounds when they cannibalized, high-pitched, the kind of sound that carried across observation tiers. Threx's lowest memory ring cracked deeper. He felt the fracture spread. 2 layers now. If it reached the 3rd layer, he would start losing memory. The newest recordings first. This morning's breakfast. Yesterday's report filing. Then older, deeper. He should leave the observation deck. Standard protocol during Class 7 and above. But he didn't move. He needed to see what happened when the chamber ran out of fears to exploit. 87 decibels. Class 6 transitioning to Class 7. The chamber's AI flagged. Target Rena 9447. No trauma architecture identified. Amplification vector absent. Recommend manual override. Manual override meant Threx could select specific fear triggers. Bypass the AI's evolutionary analysis and target the human directly. He pulled up the override menu. 342 documented human fears. Alphabetical, acrophobia, agoraphobia, arachnophobia. He selected none of them. The AI flagged again. Amplification failure, target unresponsive, escalation ineffective. Vess made a sound, low, distressed. Sir, she's not afraid. Everything is afraid, Threx said. It was the first principle of psychological filtration. Fear was universal. Every sentient species had survived because their ancestors learned to fear the right things. Predators, poison, heights, fire. The specifics varied, but the mechanism was constant. Rena reached into her right pocket, pulled out something small. Threx zoomed. A piece of candy, wrapped in clear plastic. She unwrapped it, put it in her mouth, and tucked the wrapper back in her pocket. 62 beats per minute. 91 decibels. Class 7 psychological pressure. The 2 Cryaxian cadets lost their lowest memory rings. Threx watched it happen on the neural activity feed. Childhood gone, adolescence dissolving. The chamber was erasing them from the bottom up. Genetic memory remained, but personal history was leaking out through the cracks in their shells. Threx felt his own 3rd layer fracture. His mother's voice saying his name. Gone, the specific sound of it. He could remember that she had said it, could remember the concept of her voice, but the actual sound was absent, erased. He gripped the edge of the console. The metal was cold. He focused on that, present sensation, not memory. Rena began to hum. The acoustic sensors picked it up immediately. 42 decibels, barely above a whisper, no melody Threx recognized. The AI tried to classify it. Ran the pattern through 600,000 documented human musical structures. Ceremonial, religious, cultural, entertainment. No match found. Just humming, a sound with no purpose the chamber could identify. No emotional weight, no cultural significance. Just air moving through a human throat in a specific pattern. 62 beats per minute. The chamber's pressure spiked. 93 decibels. The AI was escalating faster now, trying to break through whatever barrier the human had that made her unreadable. The acoustic baffles focused, tightened. The sound became directional, targeted. Rena kept humming. Threx checked the chamber's power consumption, 12% above normal for this stage of filtration. The AI was working harder, cycling through fear triggers faster, burning through acoustic profiles trying to find one that matched. Nothing matched. She's going to break the chamber, Vess said. The chamber doesn't break. But Threx was watching the power consumption climb. 13%, 14. The sorrow well had never had to work this hard to break a single cadet. Most species folded within the first 20 minutes. Genetic memory was powerful. The chamber just had to find the right key and turn it. Rena had no locks. 94 decibels. Class 11. Maximum rated psychological pressure. Vess collapsed. His chitin shattered across 200 fracture points. The sound was like glass breaking, sharp, final. 14,000 years of memory leaked from the cracks onto the observation deck floor. Genetic history, cultural knowledge, language patterns, the kind of information that couldn't be relearned, only inherited. It pooled around Threx's feet. Clear fluid, faintly luminescent, the biological medium that carried memory in Cryaxian neural tissue. Threx had seen it before, 43 times. It always smelled like salt and copper. The Belvroni examiner's lower torso crystallized completely. The transformation happened in 4 seconds. Organic tissue to mineral structure. Her torso fell apart. Fragments scattered across the chamber floor. Her upper body remained alive. She was screaming, but the chamber's acoustic assault drowned it out. 17 cadets remained conscious. The rest were on the floor, breathing, hearts beating, but absent. The chamber had found what they feared and made it real enough to shut them down. Protective coma, the body's last defense against psychological damage it couldn't process. Rena stopped humming. The sudden silence was louder than the sound had been. Threx felt it in his fractured chitin, the absence where the humming had been. She pulled the paper crane from the floor in front of her, held it close to her face. Threx zoomed the observation feed. She was looking at it, not with fear, not with desperation. The way someone might look at a photograph of a place they'd been, remembering something pleasant, something uncomplicated. She brought the crane to her lips. She breathed into the crane. Not a blow, not a prayer. A breath, the kind that fogs a mirror, soft enough that the acoustic sensors registered it as ambient air movement and filed it under background noise. The crane moved, barely. The wings lifted 0.03 millimeters. The sorrow well noticed. Threx watched the chamber's power consumption freeze, 94 decibels, class 11, maximum rated pressure, and the AI had stopped cycling. The targeting algorithm, which had been burning through fear profiles at 14 per second, went still. The chamber was listening. The acoustic sensors had picked up something, a harmonic pattern in the breath, not music, not language, something in between. The AI tried to classify it, ran the pattern through its full acoustic library. 300,000 documented sound profiles across 400 species. No match found. Threx leaned forward. His fractured chitin scraped against the console edge. 4 layers cracked now, he barely felt it. The chamber tried again. 94 decibels stayed constant, but the pressure distribution shifted. The AI was trying to find the frequency that would mask the breath, override it, push through whatever the human was generating and find the fear underneath. There was no fear underneath. Rena held the crane level, both hands, elbows slightly bent, the way someone holds something they are not thinking about dropping. Her heart rate read 62 beats per minute, the same number it had been when she walked in 6 hours ago and asked about the humidity. Her body temperature was steady at 36.8 Celsius. Inefficient, constant, unchanged. The chamber's power draw spiked to 21% above normal, then 26. Vess's memory pooled on the floor behind Threx, clear and faintly lit. The smell of salt and copper had spread to the far wall. Threx stood in it without moving. He had been standing in it for 4 minutes. He had not noticed until now. On the floor below, the Qualeri cluster had stopped cannibalizing. They had compressed to roughly a third of their original volume and gone still. The members on the outside were crushed against each other, limbs locked, and whatever passed for breathing in a cluster organism had slowed to almost nothing. They were in trauma suspension. The Academy had a word for it, a technical term for when a species' stress response exceeded the body's capacity to sustain it. Threx could not remember the word. He could remember very little now that did not involve the human at the exit door. The Skrillex was on the floor. Its leg joints had fractured at some point during the Class 7 surge, and the legs had folded inward. It was breathing. The biometric feed showed neural activity, but it would not stand without assistance. The joints would need surgical reconstruction. Standard outcome for Skrillex cadets who reached Class 7 before their exoskeletons had fully hardened. Threx logged this automatically. His hands moved across the console without instruction from anything he recognized as deliberate thought. The chamber's AI flagged a second time. Amplification failure, target unresponsive, escalation ineffective, manual override recommended. He had seen this flag twice before in 32 years. Both times involved environmental contamination, atmospheric pressure loss. The chamber could not function as a fear instrument when the physical environment itself was compromised. The flag was not designed for a living subject. Rena's biometric feed was still running, 62 beats per minute, 36.8 Celsius. Respiration at 14 cycles per minute. Resting parameters, the same reading she had produced when the cycle began. The chamber had spent 94 decibels of its maximum capacity on a human whose body had apparently decided nothing was happening. Threx pulled up her pre-entry intake file. Standard health screening. No anomalies, no history of sensory processing disorders, no record of unusual pain tolerance or stress suppression. She was, by every biological measure, a standard human, the kind of human the file expected to be unconscious within 60 minutes. He had been watching her for 6 hours. She was standing. Then the sound stopped. Not a ramp down, not a controlled shutdown. A stop, the way a voice cuts off mid-word. 94 decibels to 0 in .003 seconds. The sensors measured the gap, logged it. The acoustic records would show a perfect wall where the sound had been and then nothing on the other side. No flicker, no echo, no decay. At the moment of shutdown, the sensors caught something, a harmonic frequency that had not been present in any previous reading. It existed in the space between documented registers, too low for most species to hear consciously, too structured to be random noise. The sensors logged it once. When the AI tried to reproduce it for analysis, the reproduction failed. The frequency existed in the original recording and nowhere else. The amber failsafe light began to rotate. The console read, "Environment hostile to test parameters." Threx had written that line 12 years ago in the first year of his observation post, when the Academy had asked senior examiners to review and update the chamber's failsafe language. He had written it to cover atmospheric leaks, structural damage, the scenarios where the chamber itself became dangerous to the subjects inside it. He had not written it to cover a subject who was dangerous to the chamber. The Sara well went silent. All 94 decibels, all pressure cycling, all acoustic targeting. The failsafe had not been triggered by damage. No atmospheric breach. No structural failure. The chamber had assessed its own operating environment, found a condition it could not process, and stopped. The way a system stops, when the input falls outside every range it was built to handle. Rena had not broken the chamber. She had simply been something the chamber had no category for. Threx watched his console. The power consumption dropped from 26% above normal to baseline in 2 seconds. The AI went into standby. The acoustic baffles returned to resting position. The chamber was doing what it always did after a completed cycle, except the cycle had not completed. It had been interrupted by its own failsafe. On the floor below, Rena lowered the crane, looked at it for a moment. The same plain look she had given it every time. The clock look. Then she placed it in her left hand and stood up straight. She smoothed one crease on the crane with her thumb. Routine maintenance. The fold had shifted slightly when she brought it to her lips. She corrected it, 4 seconds, then she walked. To the exit door. 11 seconds of silence. Threx counted the first 7 and then stopped. He did not want to count, he wanted to watch. She raised her right hand. 3 knocks, the rhythm of someone asking to be let in from a back porch. This was where Threx's memory had started this morning. The amber light, the console reading, the human at the door with something in her left hand and her right hand raised. He had watched this moment from observation tier 4 without knowing what the 6 hours before it had contained. Now he knew all of it. The humidity question, the 62 beats per minute, the crane on the floor, the humming with no name, the breath. Knowing the 6 hours did not make the moment smaller. The doors opened. Rena walked through. At the threshold, she stopped, turned back, looked up at observation tier 4. The reinforced glass was rated to 300 meters of pressure differential. The visual distortion at this angle was minimal. Threx could see her face clearly, the angle of her head, the expression that his species' emotional recognition system kept failing to classify. She nodded once. Not gratitude, not the formal acknowledgement used between institutional ranks, something more plain than that. The nod of someone who has been in the same place as another person and is noting the fact before leaving. They had both been here. They had both seen this. That was the whole content of the nod. Then she walked away, and the corridor swallowed her. The sorrow well went silent. All 94 decibels, all pressure cycling, all acoustic targeting. Threx did not move for 4 minutes after the doors closed. He stood at the console in Vess's pooled memory and watched the chamber floor. The Belvroni examiner's fragments were still scattered across the obsidian. A medical team was already entering through the service door on the east side. They moved efficiently. They had done this before. The emergency lighting flickered on. White, the same white that had dropped when the cycle started 6 hours and 3 minutes ago. The chamber was running its restart diagnostic, looking for the fault that had caused the shutdown. It would not find a fault. There was no fault. The system had performed exactly as built. It had identified a condition outside its operational parameters and stopped. That was the correct response. The problem was that the condition was a human holding a paper crane. Threx checked his memory rings by hand, ran his fingers along the bands of calcium and keratin across his back and sides. The lower 4 layers had cracked. He should be missing records. He had seen this in other Cryaxians after high-pressure exposure. The physical structure remained, but the biological medium carrying the actual memories dissolved through the fractures. He traced each layer carefully. The memories were present. The structure had held despite the cracks. Except for one thing. He could not find the 12,600. He knew they were there. He could feel the weight of them. The density of 32 years of accumulated cycles pressed into biological tissue. But when he reached for the content, when he tried to access the specific records stored in those rings, he found only one thing. No record of their names, no record of their faces, no sound from any of the thousands of voices he had heard break inside that chamber over 3 decades. Only her humming, a sound with no melody, a pattern the AI had run through 600,000 documented musical structures and found no match for. He could hear it clearly. He could hear it right now, standing in the observation deck with Vess's memory pooling around his feet. He could not stop hearing it. 12,600 tests, 32 years. Species from 43 worlds. Gone as story, present only as structure. And over all of it, underneath all of it, the humming that the chamber had not been able to classify and his own memory had apparently decided was the most important thing he had ever heard. He submitted his observation report the next morning. He kept the language clean, power consumption data, acoustic sensor logs, biometric feed records, species outcome summary. At the end, under the recommendation field, he wrote one sentence. Recommend reclassification of Homo sapiens from Tier 4 sentient to Tier 1 environmental catalyst. No further explanation, just the data and the line. The review committee sent a clarification request. He forwarded the sensor logs. They sent another. He forwarded them again. He did not write explanatory text because he did not believe he could translate what he had seen into language the committee would accept as institutional language. Tier 1 environmental catalyst was the closest existing category. It meant a subject that altered the test environment rather than responding to it. It was a classification used for atmospheric phenomena, stellar events, things that were not alive. He was using it for a woman who had asked about a water fountain. 6 days later, he did not enter his credentials. No letter, no announcement, no meeting with the department head he had worked under for 19 years. He arrived at the entrance in the morning, stood in front of the scanner, and did not lift his hand. He stood there for a moment with his hand at his side. The scanner waited. He walked away. 3 automated messages arrived over the following days. Then a formal inquiry from the Academy's personnel division. He read them. He did not respond. He did not know what response would be accurate. Belvroni had fractured. Miss Vari had bled. The Qualeri had cannibalized. Rena had hummed. He did not know how to return to work in a building that housed a weapon the size of a 400-meter cylinder and file reports on why it kept failing to find something to break. 6 months passed. The Hall of Unprecedented Events opened a new wing on a Thursday, Threx read about it in the institutional bulletin he still received. He had not asked to be removed from the mailing list. He had not asked for anything. He checked his civilian credentials at the entrance that same afternoon. The scanner beeped twice. He walked in. The East Wing was smaller than he expected. 7 exhibits in a space that could have held 30. The room felt deliberate, like someone had decided the emptiness was part of it. 6 of the exhibits covered catastrophic events. The Veln atmospheric collapse, the Qualeri compression, the Silent Year, the Threv migration failure. He walked past them without stopping. He had read the reports on most of them. He had been alive for 2 of them. The 7th exhibit was at the center. A paper crane in a reinforced vacuum case. Cream-colored. 11 creases, sized to fit in a human hand with room left over. An amber light came from above it, the same amber as the failsafe light, and the shadow it cast on the case floor was longer than the object. The wings stretched further than they should, distorted by angle and distance, and something Threx could not identify. The shadow looked like a human silhouette. He stood in front of it. He was aware of his new chitin, the rings growing in wrong, thinner than they should be. Patchy at the edges, the way tissue grows back over a wound that was too deep to heal cleanly. When he moved his shoulders, he could feel the places where the old structure had failed, and the new material had filled the gaps with something that was not quite the same. His mother's voice was still gone, not his mother. He remembered her clearly, her face, her hands. The particular way she tilted her head when she thought someone was wrong about something. The memory of her was intact, but the sound of his name in her voice was absent. That specific frequency. The register she used when she called him in from wherever he had been. He had not realized until it was gone that he had been carrying it for 60 years. The plaque on the case read, "No upper limit identified." Beside the case, mounted on the wall in the Academy's standard institutional font, was Operational Directive 47B. He read it once. The Sara well remained operational. No changes to filtration protocol for non-human species. Cycles would continue. The calendar would fill. Other examiners would stand at observation tier 4 and watch other species break in ways that had been broken before. But no human cadet was to enter the chamber without a senior examiner present. Not in observation. In the room, standing on the floor with them. The weapon still ran. It had simply lost its authority over one species and gained, in exchange, a plaque in a museum and a new administrative policy that no one had written an explanation for. Threx stood in front of the crane for 11 minutes. He did not plan this. He did not count the time while it was passing. He noticed the duration only when he checked the hall's ambient clock on his way out, and by then the number was already behind him. 11 minutes, the same as the silence between her last knock and the door's opening. He walked to the exit, checked his civilian credentials again on the way out. Old habit, the scanner beeped once, he kept walking. Somewhere in the galaxy, there is a laundry room that smells like her. He is trying very hard not to think about that.